water source. And raw wildland. And in this raw wildland, we've got the springs that run into swampy bogs that run down through the hardwoods. And it's here, in these swampy, boggy areas, from southern Canada clear on down to Florida, that you will find the plant known as toothwort.
Ways of the Wild Institute in Vermont. And this is a continuation of my edible plant series. The plant I'm going to talk about today is toothwort. Now, like I mentioned, toothwort grows from southern Canada all the way down to Florida. There's three main species. You have the cut-leaf toothwort, the regular or common toothwort, and then you have the large toothwort. And depending on where in your location you are, will of course depend on which species or species of toothwort you have present. Now, there's very little that's edible on toothwort, but it's a very unique edible green because it gives you a spice that's very hard to find in the wild. But before I get into that, let's get a close-up shot of the toothwort and I'll explain how to identify it.
Expands quite rapidly and can cover large areas of wet forest area. And the reason is because it grows on a tuber system that spreads. Now, one thing about the toothwort, now this here's a common toothwort. You'll see it has 3 leaves, kind of similar to very large strawberry leaves. They're very roughly serrated, and if you'll notice, the leaf is not symmetrical on the sides. Alright? One half is skinnier than the other half, and the bigger half sweeps in towards the central vein. See that? Now the undersides of the leaves look pretty much the same as the top. The color even is pretty much the same. Now this lighting's a little weird, there's a glare, but the color on the bottom of the leaf and the top of the leaf is pretty much the same. There is no hair on any of the toothworts. Okay? Now these you'll see are a nice medium green color. However, there are some species, even among the same species of toothwort, that can vary in color. Let's take this one for example. Now this leaf is going out. However, the cut-leaf toothwort and even the common toothwort and the large toothwort can get this kind of a rusty burgundy type of color to it. All right. Now some of the cut-leaf toothworts, you'll find large mats that look this color and not the bright green, and they is edible on toothwort, but what is rather unique. It's the root, and as I said before, you have the root stalks that spread out all across under the leaves. And if I clear this away, you'll be able to see. See, they're very shallow. They're not buried deeply at all. But this whole thing, as you can see moving here, this is the root. And these continue to grow and branch. See, they come over in here and up into here. And all these plants come out of basically the same root system. But you'll see how this root happens to be kind of a yellowish green color. And right here, you'll notice where the plants come out of a little cluster. And then they just keep on going again over here. Now what's edible is the root. What you do is you take it out and clean it off, get all the dirt off of it. So make sure you're not ingesting parasites and insect eggs. Not very healthy for you. And after it's cleaned off, you don't even have to scrape the outside of it. You can chop it up and eat it raw, or you can just eat it raw right after you clean it. You can add it to salads and cooked greens. You can also boil it for about 5 to 10 minutes, depending on your taste. But it has a very pungent pepper-like flavor without the spice. So what I think it tastes like, almost exactly like, is horseradish. It has the exact horseradish flavor without the heat of the horseradish. So any of you who like the taste of horseradish, you can easily find toothwort in the wild and add that to your salads or mixed greens for that flavor. You can also make a tea with it. You can make a very peppery tasting tea from the toothwort roots. Now you want to remember, those of you who are not very familiar with toothwort, the only plant that is poisonous that also grows in the area of toothwort, not here in the mountains of Vermont, but many other areas of toothwort's growth environment, is poison ivy and poison oak. All right, they also have 3 leaves. Some of them can be serrated, some of them can be smooth. So make sure you positively identify toothwort so you are not trying to gather the roots of poison ivy or poison oak, which do not grow in rootstocks or bulbs. They have very fine hair roots that mat through the ground. And also the stalks on them are hairy, whereas toothwort is smooth. Okay? There's many differences, but for those who are a little unfamiliar, make sure you do your research before you go out and harvest 3-leaved plants.
Now, just as with any plant, you have to always pay attention to how you're harvesting, all right? Traditional native ways around the world always gave thanks before the plant was harvested. Because without the plants, we wouldn't survive. It's as simple as that. Even if you're a meat eater, meat eaters eat plant eaters. Plants have to survive on plants. Without plants, you don't have life. Life as we know it. So we always give our thanks before we harvest the plant. Now the toothwort, you're harvesting the root. So yes, the individual plant, the leaf cluster that's growing out of it, you are claiming its life as you take that root for food. However, the nice thing about toothwort is it does spread, all right, kind of like aspen roots, and then shoots up all over the place. So harvest from the larger mass populations, which aren't too hard to find when you're talking about toothwort. And don't select the individual or small cluster, which is still growing. Also, when you're harvesting that root, simply break it off or cut it with a sharp rock or knife. That way you don't disturb the root system of the other plants in the colony that are growing around it. Lastly, when you're talking about that root, if you harvest more than you need and you have not dried the root yet, if it's still moist, go ahead and replant it. Plant it somewhere else where it's moist and boggy. And that root will grow next year, and a new cluster and colony of toothwort will grow and survive to continue the food source of the forest. This is White Wolf, Ways of the Wild Institute. If you're interested in any classes, workshops, or learning CDs on Ways of the Wild or the traditional medicine ways, visit my website, waysofthewildinstitute.com. Willa Mollison. Be well and happy.